it's Lori again, and welcome back to my kitchen. Today I would like to do an introductory video on pressure canning. So if you are new to canning and you've never used a pressure canner before, or maybe you're not new to canning, you've water bath canned for years, but you're a little intimidated about pressure canning, I would like to just share with you how I use my Presto pressure canners. Now, all of your Presto models, that would be the Presto 16, the 21, and the Presto 23, they all function and operate in the same way. So if you have multiple models, obviously you're going to know how to use them all. Presto is one of the most user-friendly pressure canners on the market as far as my opinion is concerned. Presto also is the only canner that claims, because of the light material that their pressure canners are made out of, Presto says that they can be used on any glass top stove. So I'm going to walk through the Presto for you today, and hopefully I'll be able to maybe take some of the fear from some of you. They're super easy to use, all right? So first of all, I want to go through some really basic maintenance type things on any of your Presto canners. Now, your Presto canners, of course, do have a lid gasket. All right, all models have a lid gasket, and that lid gasket can be removed very, very simply. Now, over time, these can get dried out, and they do tend to shrink a little bit. If you've had your canner in storage for a very long time and you notice that it's really sloppy inside of your lid, you know, you can really wiggle it back and forth, your gasket has probably shrank a bit. And I'll give you just a little tip on that. You can take your gasket out and soak it in a hot sink of water for about 15-20 minutes, and a lot of times that'll plump it back up so that it doesn't fit so loose. But one of the things that's really important to do, along with keeping this gasket clean, when you wash your canner, make sure that you take the gasket out and really wash that well too, because sometimes, you know, stuff can just get up into that gasket, and it's really important to keep these clean. But another really, really important thing is to oil your lid gasket, okay? And how I do that is on your clean gasket, I just take and I just get a little bit of vegetable oil, cooking oil, on my fingers, and I just run that right all over that gasket, okay? And I personally try to get on this inside ledge also. You can see that there's, you know, there's like a ledge here. I try to get a little on my finger, and I try to run some around in there too. And that's a little bit more difficult, but if you can get some in there, it really, really helps to kind of maintain the gasket integrity, and it helps maintain so that your gasket doesn't dry out and crack as quickly. Now, I have my gaskets last literally for years, okay? So as long as you properly maintain your lid gasket, you're really not going to have to replace this very often at all. So I do really suggest keeping it clean and keeping it oiled. And I'll do this 2 or 3 times a year, just depending on how much I've been using the canner, that particular canner. I've got quite a few canners, so I kind of switch off using them. But after I oil it, then I just take a paper towel and just kind of wipe off the excess. You know, you don't have to get it completely all wiped off, but just wipe off the excess. And then, of course, put it back into your lid. Now, an important thing about storing your canners. I never store my lids locked onto the canner, because if you store your lid locked onto the canner, what you're doing is you are compressing that lid gasket. And the more you compress it, the less likely it's going to be able to hold steam. So I tend to store my canner top upside down, just so there's no pressure on that gasket consistently. Now, another really important maintenance thing is to make sure that you can see through your vent pipe, okay? Your vent pipe, oops, I'm sorry, I pointed out the wrong thing. Your vent pipe, because if you have anything blocking this vent pipe, you're going to run into trouble, okay? So what I do is I hold it up to the light and I literally just peek through there with my eye, and you should be able to very clearly see through that weight pipe vent. If there is something that's blocking it, sometimes calcium can build up in there or lime can build up in there, or if you use your canner as a pressure cooker, sometimes grease or food items can get stuck up in there too. And in that case, what you would need to do is you would need to take a pipe cleaner, you know, those fuzzy wire pipe cleaners, and get that through there and just really clean that out really well. So always check and make sure that that weight pipe vent is clear and you can see through that. And that really is a good idea every single time you use your canner, okay? Now, along with oiling the lid gasket, all of us have what is called an emergency blow-off valve, okay? And I have taken mine out today because mine really needed to be cleaned and oiled. So to take it out, you just squeeze the base of it together with your fingers on the bottom of the lid and just push it through the hole and it'll pop right out. Now, in order to clean this, because this is actually a moving part on your lid, okay? The steam, the pressure of the steam inside your canner pushes this emergency blow-off valve into the upright position. So your emergency blow-off valve should be able to, this little rubber plug should be able to freely move up and down just a little bit, okay? In order to clean this, I just take a toothbrush and take it to the sink with soapy water and just scrub it off really good with a toothbrush. That works really, really well. And then rinse it. And just like your gasket under the lid, take a little bit of that vegetable oil and oil that little thing up, because these dry out and get cracked and become faulty also. So all of the rubber parts, you know, your gasket and your blow-off emergency valve, you really want to keep them in good, supple condition. And, you know, as far as oils are concerned, I will use corn oil, vegetable oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. The one type of oil that I really tend to stay away from, and I know this is going to sound strange because most people actually recommend this for their canners, but a lot of people recommend olive oil. And I personally do not like using olive oil on my canner. And the reason why that is if you have ever used olive oil in a frying pan and it gets super, super hot, have you ever noticed how it gets really sticky and tacky and hard to come off of your pan? I don't want that to happen with my canner, and a canner operates at extremely high temperatures, so I tend to stay away from the olive oil. But anyway, when you're maintaining your little emergency button, make sure that you keep it clean and free from calcium or lime and oiled. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put that back in, and all you do is kind of the opposite of how you took it out. Just kind of squeeze it together on the base and get it back into your hole. And of course, you know, now that I'm on camera, it's going to be a struggle for me, right? I might actually have to have my Hercules strength husband come and do it, but I'll see if I can get it back in there. There, I got it. Okay, so the emergency pop-off button, let's see if I can get close enough so that you can actually see this. Now, you should be able to see it move up and down. When you're canning, this is going to move into the upright position, okay? That means that there's enough steam in the canner to hold that emergency button up. And if you ever have steam leaking around this, that probably means that you need to oil that because it's not popping up right. So just take it out, clean it, and maintain it a little bit and see if it will work. Now, your lid lock pressure valve right here. A lot of times I see problems with people's lid lock buttons. It's not popping up right, or a lot of times it will be leaking steam where it shouldn't be. And the reason is because it's not screwed together tight enough, okay? So it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, but to make sure that your lid lock button is tightened up, hold it on the bottom of the lid and just turn to the right on the top of the lid. You can loosen it, take it completely off. See how I have my parts completely off? Hopefully you can see that. And put it back together and screw it tight. All right. And this is another piece that you want to maintain, okay? Sometimes those can become kind of corroded up with calcium or lime deposits if you have hard water. So make sure that that moves freely also, all right? You should be able to move it very, very freely. Okay, now, another thing that I want to warn you before using your canner is regardless of whether you use vinegar in your water or cream of tartar, which I prefer cream of tartar. Now those two items are used in your canning water inside of your canner to help prevent calcium and lime deposits from sticking to the outside of your jars. And when you use vinegar, you literally only need like 2 tablespoons of vinegar. It's not very much at all. When I use cream of tartar, depending on the hardness of my water, I only use like 1/4 teaspoon to 1/2 teaspoon. You can use as much as 1 teaspoon if you have really bad water conditions, but I can get away with just like 1/4 teaspoon, and we have a private well. But you know, that all depends too on where you live in the country, or where you live, yeah, in the country, and or your area of the world, and how hard your water level is. But what I really want to warn you of is I want to warn you that you're going to have this beautiful brand new canner, and probably after your very first pressure canning session, you're going to look inside that canner and go, oh, what happened? Your canner will discolor, okay? And it can be anything from a very light discoloring to almost black. Sometimes I've seen canners, well, my Miro actually is very black on the inside of it, and that's just something that happens to all canners. So don't panic about it. You didn't do anything wrong. It just happens. And you can see like mine right here, my canning rack that comes with the canner. You can see how discolored my canning rack is, okay? It's very, very normal. So don't be shocked when you open up your brand new canner and it's not shiny and pretty on the inside anymore, okay? So another very, very important thing is do not leave standing water inside of your Presto canner for days on end, okay? Sometimes it's really easy to forget. You know, you're just tired from the canning that you've done, and you've gone to bed and you've washed your jars and labeled your jars and put them away, and you forgot that canner still had water on it on the stove, and 3 or 4 days later you find it. Well, if that occurs too often, if you leave standing water inside of your canner for too often, your canner can start to pit, which is where the aluminum will actually start kind of wearing away and pitting, and you get these little, kind of like divots or whatever you want to call on the inside of your canner. You want to avoid that, because what that's doing is it's eating away the metal, and of course then the bottom of your canner in certain places getting thinner and thinner. So try to avoid leaving standing water in your canner for long periods of time. Now, I'm not saying that you have to absolutely hurry up and be panicked about it and dump it out after each canning session. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that at the end of your day, just dump it out and lightly wash your canner. If you need to scrub it up good, scrub it up good, but at least dump it out so that there's just not water standing in there. All right, so all Presto canners do come with this canning rack. It is super, super important whenever you are canning, whether it's a hot water bath or a pressure canner, to have something underneath your jars so that your jars are not sitting on the bottom of the canner. Because if your jars are directly on the bottom of your canner, the heat of your burner can actually crack and break your jars. So make sure that you always have your canning rack in there. Now, in the Presto 23 and 21 models, they're tall enough that you can double stack jars. And if you don't have an extra rack, you can go into your baking supplies in your store, and you can find a cookie cooling rack. Or Roger and I found this in the grill section of Fleet Farm. And what this was is it was just a replacement grill for one of those round charcoal grill outdoor, grills that you put your steaks and your hamburgers and stuff on. And this has really come in handy. He just cut it You know, it was a little bit bigger than obviously than it is right now, but he just cut it and then made little feet for me in case I ever want to use it in the bottom of the canner too. I mostly use this as my separation rack in between the bottom and the top layers, but these are wonderful from the grill section. Or like I said, in the baking section, you can find round cookie cooling racks, and those work really, really well. Now, if neither one of those, you know, is something that you want to go out and buy, what I suggest doing is and this isn't the choice of towel that I would use. I would use a terry cloth towel. So please keep that in mind. I'm not suggesting a tea towel, but it's just what I have handy right now. If you want to double stack in your Presto 21 or Presto 23 and you don't have a secondary rack like this, what you can do is you can take a terry cloth towel and lay it in the bottom of your canner and then put your first layer of jars in and then use your canning rack on top of that first layer in order to stack your second layer on. You can do it vice versa. You can put this in the bottom of your canner as normal. Excuse me. And then you can cover your first layer with a thick terry cloth towel and stagger your jars so that, well, here I'll move this out here so that you can see. I'm going to be doing a canning project so that you can actually see how the canner works. But let's pretend that this is your first layer of jars. You never want to double stack directly on top of one another. If you place that towel down on top of your first layer, you want to stagger them so that your jars are in between the seams of the jars underneath, okay? Never double stack directly one on one. You always want to stagger them. Now, if you have that solid rack, you know, like your canning rack, or if you have one of these that you can put on top of your bottom layer, you don't have to worry about staggering them because this distributes the weight equally on that whole bottom layer, okay? But if you only have a towel to use, that's what you can do. But that's why I suggest putting the towel on the bottom layer, because that bottom layer is going to be nice and sturdy and level on top of that towel, and then you can use your rack on top of that first layer, and your second layer is going to be nice and stable also. Okay, so the Prestos all call for 3 quarts of water for a canning session, and that includes even as long as fish. You know, we all know that fish requires a little bit longer than meat even does, but those 3 quarts of water will get you through even the longest canning periods, pressure canning periods, 90 minutes, 100 minutes. Those 3 quarts of water will last you that long as all of your seals are good and you're not leaking steam anywhere that you shouldn't be leaking steam from on your canner. Let's see if I can think of anything else. Oh, the whole fundamental function of pressure canners. Pressure canners work off of steam. Air does not transmit heat as easily as water does, but water does not transmit heat as easily as steam does. Steam is actually one of the best transmitters of heat that you can find, and pressure canners are designed to work off of steam. So you never want to have your jars submerged underwater in a pressure canner. Now, we all know that in water bathing, you want to submerge your jars underneath 2 inches of water, but in a pressure canner, you don't want that to happen. You always want your jars, you know, the tops of your jars above the water level inside of your canner. Now, sometimes this can become an issue because, you know, Prestos call for 3 quarts of water. Well, what if you want to do tiny little half pints or even quarter pints? I'm going to reach up here and grab an example. Okay, now this is like a little short, tiny little short. Here's a regular pint jar, and here's a little quarter pint jar. Now, if I put these in my pressure canner just on top of my canning rack, they're going to be submerged underwater. I do not want that to happen. So what I will do is I will take either an old tin pie plate, I don't know if you all remember, do you remember that restaurant chain called Poppin' Fresh Pies? Their pies used to come in these nice metal pie plates that you could return and get a little deposit back. Now, I'm not sure that they still do that, but if you have an old tin pie plate that you can just invert upside down and put in the bottom of your canner and then place your canning rack, oops, I got a pause there, and then place your canning rack on top of that upside down pie plate, that will raise your canning rack up so that your little 1/4 pint jars will not be submerged under those 3 quarts of water, okay? They're gonna have their little heads peeking out the way that they should. Now, if you don't have a pie plate, what you can do is you can take and you can put some canning rings just in the bottom of your canner and then place your canning rack on top of that, and that will raise up a little bit more. Just whatever you can come up with that will raise it up so that you can do those tiny little 1/4 pints without submerging them underwater. You come up with your own solution, but those are a couple of really good tips on how to do it. Okay, so I think at this point in time, I believe, oh, yeah, no, I'll talk about weights and stuff after I get my canner water in there. But there are a couple of different options. Prestos do come standard with a 15-pound weight, okay? And not all of us can or need to can at 15 pounds of pressure. And of course, all of the newer Presto models do also come with these readable type gauges, okay? The really important thing to know about these readable type gauges is they can become uncalibrated and they can lie to you. And you really don't know when they're not reading correctly. It's suggested to have these tested and serviced once or twice a year, depending on how often you can, okay? So if you regularly use your Presto canner and you rely on this gauge, have it tested more often. If you are just a very seasonal canner and you only can, just a few times in the summertime when you're bringing things in from the garden, you could probably get away with only having it tested once a year. But really important, if you drop this on your counter or if you bang it really hard with something, that can also cause your readable gauge to become uncalibrated. These things are actually pretty sensitive, okay? So treat it nicely. Never submerge your readable gauge underwater, okay? So let's say you have a bowl of water over in your sink and you carry over your lid and you just set this inside your sink and this readable gauge is submerged in that bowl of water that you have soaking in the sink. No, don't let that happen, okay? Sometimes you will see that just during normal use, the face of your readable gauge sometimes will steam up, and that's normal too. That steam will go away on its own. This actually is not a sealed unit, okay? This plastic face is not completely sealed so that there is some airflow, so that if moisture does get in there, it will evaporate on its own and clear up on its own. Now, up to, everybody cans at a different pressure. Now, everybody from sea level to 1,000 feet, all of your low acid foods, that would be your meats and your vegetables and your broths, all of your low acid foods need to be pressure canned at 10 pounds of pressure. That's from sea level to 1,000 feet. Now from 1,000 feet on up, it varies by your altitude, okay? So in order to find out what altitude you live at, and this is important for everybody to know when you're pressure canning, you find your altitude by Googling it and just Google the city or the town that you live in and just Google what is the altitude at yada, 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 okay? And that will tell you what altitude that you're at, and then you will know how many pounds of pressure that you need to be canning. But across the board, from sea level to 1,000 feet, it is definitely 10 pounds of pressure. Now, if you are relying on your readable gauge, okay, if you are relying on your readable gauge, it has to read 11 pounds in order to be canning at that 10 pounds of pressure, okay? It has to read 11. Now, with the refill gauge or even with your weights, it is always better to can over your recommended pounds than under. Never can under what you are recommended to can at. But if you have a hard time maintaining, let's say you need to can at 10 pounds of pressure, you're having a really hard time maintaining that 10 pounds of pressure. You know, you're adjusting the heat and you know, it keeps jumping up to 13 and then it cools down and it goes below 10 and then, you know, you turn it up and okay, it's much better than playing that little badminton game of highs and lows. It's much better if you can maintain your canner at 12 or 13 pounds, even though you really only need to be at 10. It's much better just to maintain it at that 12 or 13 pounds. Allow your canner to just sit wherever it is happiest. Sometimes it depends on the BTUs of your burner. You know, sometimes if you can't reach a certain pounds of pressure, sometimes that will mean that your burner is not enough BTUs to heat the canner as hot as it needs to get. Sometimes with gas stoves, your BTUs are so high that you can't regulate it any lower because you've turned your gas burner all the way down. It doesn't get any lower. And so it's just really important for you to understand that it is okay. It will not damage your food. It will not overcook your food. I swear, when you are pressure canning food, pressure canned goods are cooked to death, okay? Heat changes everything. And when you are talking about the high temperature of pressure canning, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between something that's canned at 10 pounds of pressure and something that's canned at 15 pounds of pressure or anywhere in between. They're all gonna look, taste, and feel the same in your mouth, okay? So if you have a hard time maintaining your pressure, always opt to go over and above what is recommended. Don't go under, okay? Don't go under. That's dangerous, but above is okay to do. All right, so I am going to get the 3 quarts of water, and like I said, I use cream of tartar just because I prefer cream of tartar in my canning water to keep the lime and the calcium deposits off of my jars. I prefer it over vinegar because vinegar is very, very corrosive, okay? Vinegar is extremely hard on today's modern rings and lids. Never used to be that way. I can even tell you 5 years ago it wasn't that way. But after the year of 2020 and we got all of these cheaply manufactured things coming into our stores, you can have brand new rings, and after your very first canning session, they're going to come out looking like garbage, particularly if you use vinegar. Vinegar corrodes them terribly. So I opt to use cream of tartar. It still does the same thing as vinegar by keeping the calcium and the lime deposits off of your jars, but it's a little less corrosive and it's a little gentler on your rings and your lids. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my 3 quarts of water in the pressure canner and a little bit of cream of tartar in there, and then I'll come back and we'll get the canner loaded together and we'll walk through the venting and up to pressure and processing. So I'll be right back in a minute. All right, so I have my 3 quarts of water in my canner with just a little bit of cream of tartar in there, and I'm going to make sure that my canning rack is in the bottom of the canner. Now with the Presto 23 and Presto 21, like I mentioned before, you can double stack your jars, okay? Pint size or half pints, even with quarter pints, you can triple or quadruple stack them, but it always requires the same amount of water, no matter what size jar and no matter how many layers you're gonna do. But in the 23, it will hold 2 layers of pint jars. You cannot double stack quart size jars in the Presto 21 or Presto 23. Now, I know that the AA has a model or maybe 2 models that you can double stack quarts in theirs, but Presto does not have a model where you can double stack quart jars, but you can double stack the pints, the half pints, the quarter pints in there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just start putting, I'm doing dog food today. I had some freezer burnt meat. I'm trying to clear out my freezers, as you all know. And so I'm making up some dog food for Sadie. And so that's what we're going to be canning today. And with your wide mouth jars, you're not going to be able to fit in as many wide mouth jars as what you can with the regular size mouth jars, all right? So that's important for you to know too. On the box, it says that the Presto 23, I think, can hold 18 or 19 pints. I can't remember what it is, but I know it's one of those numbers. That fully depends on whether you are using large mouth jars or regular mouth jars. Regular mouth jars you can fit more in than with the wide mouth. And sometimes it depends on the style of your jar too. You know, a lot of jars are round, but there are some square jars. And of course, you know, the shape of your jar is going to determine how many you fit into your canner also. But I'm just going to go ahead and fill up the bottom layer here. Oh, another really important thing I will stop and say. Whenever you're canning, whether it be hot water bath or pressure canning, it is super imperative to match the temperature of the jars and the food item with the temperature of your canning water. So these are at room temperature today, okay? They're not hot at all. I haven't cooked it. Everything is just all at room temperature. So I'm starting with cold or room temperature water. Now, if I was doing a hot item, I would want to heat my canner water up to match the temperature of the hot food and jar that I'm putting into it. And what that does is it avoids something called thermal shock. Thermal shock is when your jar breaks because of the drastic change between super hot and super cold. So if you have very hot canning water and you put a room temperature or cold jar into that hot canning water, your jar is going to go, no, and it's going to break. All right. So you always want to match the temperature of your food and the temperature of your canner water. All right. So I will continue getting these in here. It is okay for your jars to touch. All right. And it is okay for your jars to touch the outside of the canner. That causes no harm at all. So I have 2, 4, 6, I have 8 in my bottom layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my rack on top. Now, my bottom layer of jars, I only have my recommended 3 quarts of water in my canner. My bottom layer of jars are not under the level of the water. The water is coming up maybe halfway up the jars, all right? And that's the way it should be. So let's get the rack in there, and then we'll see if I can fit the rest of these jars in. I've got a combination of wide mouth and regular mouth jars. I'm hoping I can get them all in, but I didn't really count. I just was preparing them and going with the flow. So, aha, look at that, guys. I'm going to be able to do it. No problem at all. So hopefully, oh yeah, you can see that on the camera. So we have our double stack layers in there. Now, your canning time, regardless of whether you do a single layer or a double layer, your canning time remains the same. So single layer or double layer, the canning time remains the same. I have meat in my dog food today, and so I'm going to be pressure canning for 75 minutes for pint jars. So we have all of our jars in there. We have our maintained lid. My weight pipe stem is clear. I checked that. I checked my emergency blow-off button. It can move freely up and down. My lid lock pressure valve can move freely up and down. And my gasket, the lid gasket, is freshly oiled. So we are ready to go. Now, what I do, you can see on your lid that there is on the Presto models, at least most of them. I don't know if my 21 has it or not. I can't remember, but I know that my 16 and my 23 does. It has this little arrow that is kind of engraved in the top of the lid. And sometimes what I have done in the past is I've taken a little permanent black marker and I've just gone over that V so it's a little easier to see for my eye. What I tend to do is I always have the handle that has the matching arrow on it. I always like to have that on the right hand side of my canner. That's the way that we put our pressure valve on because I knew I would want it facing this direction, but I prefer to have it on the right-hand side just because I'm a righty. I'm a right-handed person, and that's easiest for me to line up instead of on the left-hand side. So you line your arrows up and your lid should just very easily go on, and then you turn it one turn clockwise. Just, it'll lock into place just right like that. And that's when you start heating your canner. Now, when you're heating your canner, I prefer to heat my canner slowly. I don't just crank it up on high, particularly when I am working with room temperature stuff. When I'm heating things up in there, I like to do it only over medium heat. Now, if I was starting with a hot canner and a hot food item, then I might crank it up on high to reach my vent a little quicker. But if I'm working with cold items, I like to do it slower because I don't want to cause thermal shock, number one. And number two, if you heat them from a cold state a little slower, you're going to avoid some of that overflow and siphoning issue that you can have. So I'm just going to turn on my burner and I'm going to bring it to a vent. And then at that point in time when it's venting, I'm going to come back and show you exactly what to look for as far as what a full vent is on the Presto canner. So we'll be back in just a minute. All right, so my canner is almost up to what I consider a full vent, but at this point in time, I just want to do a couple of, one particular little check with you. If you see that there is any steam coming out anywhere or drips of water, like which I just had a drip of water. See, it's dripping from this handle here or near the handle. If you see that happening, sometimes what that means is that your lid gasket seal, that gasket that we oiled, sometimes that's not seated properly. Now, before this lid lock button comes up, you can actually turn your lid a couple of times to try to reseat that seal and get it on there correctly. All right, so as long as your canner is not under pressure yet and your lid lock button is not in the upright position, you can reseat that gasket lid seal. Now, if your canner is under pressure and you're seeing that you're having steam coming out from underneath the lid in a place where it shouldn't be, you would want to turn your heat off, allow your canner to cool off until your lid lock button drops down on its own, and then you can turn and reseat that lid gasket. So right now, hopefully I have gotten that drip to stop, and I'm going to continue just heating my canner until it's at a full vent, and I'll come back and show you what I consider to be a full vent. Okay, I came back. We're not quite to a vent yet, but I came back because I figured that I had better talk a little bit about the Presto weight again, all right? So now, like I said, the Presto canners all come with this standard one-piece 15-pound weight. Now, if you are going to can anything under 15 pounds when you're using this weight, or Presto actually calls it a regulator, us old people, we call this a weight. If you're going to can at anything less than 15 pounds of pressure, this weight will not move. Now, you might hear a little bit of steam once in a while leaking out from underneath it. It'll kind of hiss a little bit, but it will not jiggle until you reach 15 pounds of pressure. Now, when you reach 15 pounds of pressure, this weight or regulator will start jiggling. Just the classic noise that you will come to you'll come to know it. And if this is jiggling, that means that you're at 15 pounds of pressure. Now, these do not come standard. The ones that I'm going to cover right now do not come standard with the Presto canner. The reason why Presto sends a 15-pound weight is because that is all encompassing of anybody that wants to can right away. So people at 10 pounds can can, people that need to can at 15 can can. And so that's why Presto is elected to send that 15-pound weight. Now, if you can under that 15-pound mark, you can rely on your readable gauge. If you don't want to sit and babysit your canner to keep your readable gauge, you know, where it should be, you can buy, this is an aftermarket piece. This is called a 3-piece weight. And the three-piece weights, make sure that wherever you're purchasing it from, make sure that it is that it will work on a Presto canner. So look for your model of Presto canner. But these are sold in a couple of different places online, and they're not really that expensive. I think they're still under $20. But one of these will make your life easier. Now, if you remember right, I told you that the readable gauge can become uncalibrated and it can start lying to you. But a weight can never lie. It's never changing. It can't malfunction, okay? So in the broad scheme of things, I trust my weight before I ever trust a readable gauge. It's just my personal opinion, and I don't like to keep taking my pressure canner in to the county extension office to have them test and fix my readable gauge. I just don't want to mess around with that. It's an additional cost, at least in my area. I mean, it's not, it's not a huge amount of money, but in my county, they do charge for it to test and recalibrate your readable gauge. But a weight cannot ever change and it cannot ever lie. So I trust a weight over a readable gauge any day. Now, this is a three-piece weight, like I said, that you can buy. They have them on Amazon and other places. And when I say a three-piece weight, there is literally 3 pieces to this weight. It has a center stem, which is 5 pounds. Now, I don't ever pressure can fruit. Fruit is high acid, and I prefer to water bath all of my fruit, and that's really technically it's suggested to water bath can your fruit, because pressure canning is pretty hard on things that are that have natural sugars in them. But if you are going to pressure can fruits, they do suggest doing it at 5 pounds of pressure. So your center stem is 5 pounds, and each one of these rings is another 5 pounds. So you have 5, and then if you add that one ring, you have 10, and if you add another one, you have 15 pounds. So I can, at 10 pounds of pressure, according to my altitude, I take one ring off, and this becomes a 10-pound weight. Now, the benefit of this is instead of standing here and babysitting my canner and trying to make sure that I've got that readable gauge at the poundage that it should be, I can just place my 10-pound weight that I've taken, I've taken one of the rings off. I can place this, and once I hear that jiggling, it just keeps jiggling all the way through the process. As long as I'm within earshot, I don't have to stand here and babysit my canner. I can do the dishes. I can go clean the living room. As long as I can hear my canner and I can hear that rocking of that weight, then I know I'm at 10 pounds of pressure and I'm good to go. So that's just another little thing that you can do with your Presto canners. I'm not sure if the All-American canners, I don't know if that's an option for them or not, but with the Presto, it is definitely an option. So I guess that I will be back in just a few minutes. You can see hopefully on the camera that I am starting to get some steam. Now, the Presto manual actually says that this is considered venting. Once you can see a steady stream of steam coming out of your weight pipe vent only, that is now what Presto considers to be a vent. But I am old school. I was taught to vent my canners after the lid lock pressure valve has come into the upright position and my emergency blow-off valve has popped up, and that's when I start timing my vent. It's what I consider a full vent. I'm going to go on and I'm going to make a video about using your pressure canner as a steam canner, and it's really important in steam canning that those things are met, that your emergency blow-off valve has popped up and your lid lock pressure valve has come up into the upright position, and that's how you steam can using your canner. So like I said, a full vent, in my opinion, it's really important to have these things happen, that your emergency button pops up and your pressure valve lid lock pops up. And we're not exactly at that point in time yet, so I'll come back when that happens. All right, guys, so I turned my lights off in hopes that you can see the canner a little bit better and move the camera a little closer. Now, I'm still not at what I consider to be a full vent, even though you can see a very steady stream of steam. Like I said, I'm old school. I'm not really sure when Presto changed their manual and instructions on venting. But if you want to go ahead and follow the manual, you can do it your way. This is just how I have always done it and how I will continue to do it. But before we're at a full vent here, I want to show you that at this point in time, there's enough steam in my canner that I can see that my emergency blow-off valve, my emergency blow-off button, that rubber plug in the back, has popped up into the upright position. Now, if that wasn't in the upright position, if you haven't maintained that and kept it clean, you might see steam escaping from there. And so if you hear or see steam, hopefully the camera is picking that up. If you hear or see steam escaping from that little emergency blow-off button, you know that it's not popping up correctly and it might need to be cleaned and possibly oiled. So that's one of those troubleshooting things that you will need to know on your model. Now you can see that steam is also starting to come from my lid lock pressure valve button on the front of the canner, and that is completely normal. That will happen before this button pops up. Sometimes you will also get, it's very, very common for little spurts of water and a little pool of water to collect on this lid lock button. Okay, that's totally normal for that to happen. And once it gets closer to popping up here, what I do, when I see steam coming from here and if I see any water pooling, I'll just take a dry towel. And of course, you want to have quite a few layers. Don't do a skinny layer because obviously, you guys, it's hot. But what you can do is you can just take a dry towel and just wipe that pooled water right off of that area. All right. If there's any pooled water, you just wipe that right off with a towel, and generally it will pop right up. You can see right now my lid lock button is popping up. There's enough steam in my canner that it's just pressing up on that lid lock button all on its own. All right. You don't have to place the weight in order to get this button to pop up. It will pop up when there is enough steam in your canner. Now, this is what I consider to be a full vent. My emergency blow-off button is up, my lid lock pressure valve button is up, and I only have steam coming from the weight pipe vent. There's no steam coming from around the under edge of the lid at all. Like I said, if you have problems with that, try to reseat it. And if you still can't get it fixed, take your, let your pressure come down, the pressure of the steam. You're not really under pressure yet, but let your canner cool off a little bit so you can open the lid. Try washing your lid gasket and try oiling it and putting it back on and then beginning the process over again. But a lot of times you can just reseat it like I showed you before by kind of unlocking and relocking the lid a couple of times. Usually that will reseat it. Now, if none of those things prevent steam from coming out from underneath the lid, that's the point that you probably need to buy a replacement lid gasket. But there's a lot of tricks that you can try before you have to go ahead and purchase a new gasket. All right, so now we are at a full vent. You always vent your canner for 10 minutes before placing your weight. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn my timer on for 10 minutes. On my gas stove, I can just keep it at medium heat to maintain this nice vent. All you really want to do is you want to have enough heat to keep your lid lock button in the upright position and your emergency blow-off valve in the upright position. So you don't have to have it on high heat, just maintain that medium heat all the way through the vent, and even going on into when we place our weight on the canner, you can still just maintain that medium heat. Just try to avoid, all we're doing is we're trying to avoid extreme highs and extreme lows, all right? We just kind of want to go middle of the road through the whole process. Do not be in a hurry, because that's when you're going to run into issues. Pressure canning does take a little bit of patience, and it does take quite a bit of time. It takes time to heat the canner up, to vent the canner, And then after the process time, it takes a long time for this to cool off on its own. So you just can't be in a hurry. But anyway, I'm going to allow my canner to vent like this for 10 minutes, and then I'll come back and place the weight. All right, so I have vented for 10 minutes, and this is the point in time then that you will place your weight. Now, regardless of doing, your 15-pound weight, or if like me, you've gone ahead and you've gotten one of these adjustable weights, which I'm going to use my adjustable weight today. And so I'm going to put my 10-pound weight just right on the weight stem. Now, one of the things that I forgot to tell you is that when I was heating my canner up just with medium heat, it actually took 45 minutes for my canner to heat fully to a vent. You got to remember that I was starting from room temperature, and not only is the canner having to get hot, but it's also having to heat all of the jars of food in there. I have like 18 jars inside of my canner. So it does take quite a while for your canner to come up to a vent. That is nothing to worry about. It's not a problem. Now, I wanted to talk to you, those of you that only have the 15-pound weight, but you need to can at a lower pounds of pressure than just the 15. So your weight will not ever jiggle or rock, okay? Or your regulator, like I said, Presto calls this a regulator. Your regulator or weight will not jiggle at all if you're canning at less than 15 pounds of pressure, but you're using this 15-pound weight. Now, for all of those of you from sea level up to 1,000 feet, you will want to, on your readable gauge, read it at 11 pounds, okay? It has to be at 11 in order to be technically canning at 10 pounds. I'm not sure why that is, but read your Presto manual, that's what it states. And all of the altitude charts state that also. On the readable gauges, for some reason, you have to hold it at 11 pounds or higher on your readable gauge to be at that 10-pound mark. Now, if you are using that readable gauge and you're going by altitude, anyone from, now this doesn't include just the 10-pound weight. This is if you're using the 15-pound weight and you're doing your readable gauge. You can fine tune in onto your altitude and your pounds of pressure from sea level to up to 2,000 feet on the readable gauge. You want to keep it at 11 on your readable gauge. If you are from 2,000 to 4,000 feet, you want to read at 12 on your readable gauge. If you're from 4,000 to 6,000 feet, you want to read out at 13 pounds of pressure on your readable gauge. 6,000 to 8,000 feet is reading at 14 pounds of pressure. That's your safe pressure to can up at. From 8,000 and above, you want to have 15 pounds of pressure, at which point in time your 15-pound Presto factory provided weight or regulator will start jiggling at 15 pounds of pressure. Now, when you're talking the specific 10-pound or 15 pounds, if you're not going to be trusting or relying on your readable gauge at all, you just want to rely on just the weight. For 10 pounds, it's up from sea level to 1,000 feet altitude, wherever you live in the world. From sea level to 1,000 feet, you use the 10-pound weight. Over 1,000 feet, you use the 15-pound weight. So actually using the weight method is not only more reliable, but it's a lot easier to figure out instead of watching this readable gauge and trying to fine tune in exactly what your altitude and exactly what pound, what pressure you should be at on that readable gauge. It's much easier just to do either the 10 or the 15-pound weight. And these adjustable weights, like I said, they are amazing little things for the Presto canners. They will work on any Presto canner, but when you are ordering and purchasing one, make sure to just confirm that it will fit on your model of Presto. All the Presto weight pipe stems are all the same size, but make sure that whoever manufactured your 3-piece weight has made it to accommodate Presto canners. Now, one other thing that I wanted to say about these adjustable weights, these 3-piece weights, and I have 3 of them. But when you purchase them, they have a retainer clip. When they come in the mail, they have a retainer clip right at the top of the 2 rings, okay? That retainer clip, it's almost impossible to remove. Oops, sorry guys, I'm dropping things. Now this one I haven't removed the retainer clip, and I can barely get this thing apart with that retainer clip on there. It's just a devil, okay? And so what you can do is you can, with a pliers and a screwdriver, you can pull this retainer, it's just a little round retainer clip. You can pull the retainer clip off from underneath that ledge, and then your weights, your rings will come off much easier. And that retainer clip has nothing to do with the actual weight of, you know, pressure canning. That retainer clip does not add any weight really at all to the stem or to the functioning of this 3-piece weight system. So you can remove that retainer clip just so it's a little easier to use for yourself. You can remove it without, I guess, changing the function of your weight at all. So that's just another little tip. Now we are going to just not change our heat at all. We're still over that medium heat, and I'm just going to wait until my 10-pound adjustable weight that I put on there starts to jiggle, and then I will come back so that you can see and hear what it should sound like when I have reached that 10 pounds. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, so as you can see, my weight is just starting to dance or jiggle, and you will see a little steam escaping. That's what a weight is supposed to do. It allows that steam to escape little by little so that it keeps it at that 10-pound pressure. Or if you're using the 15-pound weight, when this starts jiggling, it's releasing just a little bit of steam to keep it at the 15 pounds. So this is about how you want your weight rocking. And with the Presto, it will be a consistent rock. You know, I've seen a lot of information out there that your weight should just rock, 3 times during a minute. That's not how the Presto works. The Presto, when you're using a weight, it's just a steady rock all the time. And so this is what I'm saying, that you can be anywhere within earshot, and if you hear this weight jiggling away, you know your canner is fine and operating properly. Now, if it gets going too much higher than that 10 pounds, it will stop jiggling and it will just hiss. And that will indicate to you that you might want to turn your burner down just a little bit, but don't do it drastically, all right? Pressure canning over your appropriate pounds is fine to do. Pressure canning under is not. So if your weight's been jiggling and all of a sudden, you know, you hear it dancing faster and faster and faster, and then it's not really dancing anymore, it's just kind of hissing, constantly hissing, then you know that your heat is a little bit too high, and you just back your heat off just a little bit and do it in very small increments, and allow your canner at least up to 5 minutes in between each very small heat adjustment to see if you get that sweet spot and get that nice steady rocking motion again. Now that our weight is jiggling, this is the time that you actually start your process timer. Now I'm doing dog food today, which has meat in it, and it was pints, so I'm going to be processing them for 75 minutes. Now that my weight is jiggling, I know I'm up to my 10 pounds pressure. Now I'm going to start my 75-minute process time. And there we go. Now, I'm just going to stay within earshot of my canner so that I can hear my weight jiggling and dancing happily away. It's a wonderful sound. You grow to absolutely adore and love this sound. But I'm going to go off and do some other things for the next 75 minutes, and then I'll come back when the process is almost done. Okay, so I'm at the end of my 75-minute process time. I'm going to turn off my timer and simply turn off the heat. Now, we do not touch anything at all. Leave your weight in place, walk away, and allow your canner to cool down naturally. A lot of times this will take almost close to an hour, depending on how cool your room or ambient air temperature is in your house. So just leave it be, walk away, and I'll see you again after this is cooled off in approximately an hour. All right, so I am back after allowing my canner to cool off naturally on its own. Now you'll see, and you can even kind of press on it, but you'll see that your emergency blow-off button back here is completely back down. And you will also, sometimes you can actually hear this drop. When all the pressure has been, depressurized naturally in your canner, you'll hear your pressure valve lid lock button drop back down. So the lid lock button is down, my emergency blow-off button is down, and now I know that it is safe to remove my weight. There's absolutely no pressure left in the canner. Now you still want to slow down this cooling process, okay? So what I do is I open the lid and I just barely crack it open just ever so slightly. You don't want to completely remove it. Just crack it open just ever so slightly and just kind of put it off on the side. I'll see if I can turn it here. So you can see what I mean. All right, so I really haven't removed the lid at all. I've just cracked it open so there's just a little space. And I'm going to allow this to cool for at least another 10 minutes without doing anything more. So I'll be right back. We'll let this cool. All right, now that I've let it cool down 10 minutes, I'm going to move the lid just a tiny bit more back to just allow a little bit more cool air in, but I don't want to remove that lid. So we're just slowing down the cool off process, and what this does is it prevents all of your cold room air rushing into that extremely hot canner and forcing the hot fluids. The change in temperature, drastic and quick change in temperature, will force your fluids to siphon out of your jars. So if you slow down this cool off period just a little bit longer, you will avoid quite a bit of siphoning. In fact, you might avoid siphoning altogether. So we're going to go through now another 10-minute cool off period with just a little bit more room there, with the lid back just a little bit. So I'll be back in another 10 minutes. All right, so I've allowed it to cool off another 10 minutes, and now I feel like it is safe to remove my lid and remove my jars from the canner. Now, another little thing that I just always like to remind people of is when you are lifting your jars out of your canner, you always want to go below the glass lip that every single jar has, okay? I'm just going to use my dried tomato powder here as an example. All right, below your threads, there is this glass lip that goes on. All canning jars have this glass lip. You always want to make sure that when you go to lift your jars out, that your lifter is below that glass lip, okay? You don't want to ever grab and lift your jars by the lid itself or by the screw-on band. This is not proper. Do not lift on that screw-on band. You go beneath that screw-on band to lift your jars. All right, so I'm just going to take my jars of dog food out here. And this video obviously was not about what I was canning, but how to use the canner. So whatever you are canning, have a thick towel on your countertop to protect your jars from thermal shock, because your jars are extremely hot coming from the canner, and if you put them just directly onto a cold counter, you can have thermal shock. And at this point in time, with such extremely hot contents, not only is that sad to lose a jar of food, but it's also very dangerous. You don't want to have anything busting open at this point in time. Gonna lift out that separating rack and be able to get at the lower level of jars. I heard one seal already. All right, guys. So now the last thing is just to completely let your canner cool down. And if you're not going to do any more canning for the day, always empty your canner water and rinse your canner out at least and allow it to dry. If you ever have a canner that runs dry, which you should never have your canner run dry. I have plenty of water yet in my canner. I tipped it, and so of course it all runs over here, but you can hear it. There's plenty of water still in there. If you ever have your canner run dry, do not put cool water into your dry canner, because you will crack your canner. So if you do happen to have a canner that has ran dry or almost ran dry, just allow it to completely cool. Leave it as is, allow it to completely cool. I think that pretty much covers everything. Oh, except for now your hot jars that you've removed from the canner, don't touch them. Just walk away from them. Don't touch them for at least 12 to 16 hours. Don't come over and start pushing on lids and testing. Don't retighten the rings or anything. Just pull them from the canner and allow them to sit and cool and seal without disturbing them at all. After they have sealed, you can remove the bands and definitely wash your jars up. Sometimes if you have siphoning, things would be pushed out from underneath the flat lid, juices or maybe grease or little tiny food particles or whatever, and they will get trapped underneath this screw-on band. And so after the canning process is over and your jar is sealed, okay, let's pretend this is sealed, just take your band off, wash your bands up, and also scrub your jar really, really well, all right? Because what that does is in storage, if you don't wash your jars up after canning, if there is any siphoned food on the outside of the jar, number one, it can mold, which doesn't harm the food inside of the jar at all, but who wants moldy, yucky stuff on your shelves, right? And also it can draw bugs. So it's always recommended after they have cooled completely and sealed to remove those screw-on bands and scrub your jars up really well. Then of course label and date them with what the contents of the food and the date that you canned them on before you then put them into storage. So that is how easy it is, honestly, to use the Presto canners. I hope you guys found all of the information very, very useful. I really appreciate you spending your time with me again today. God bless you all, and happy canning, everybody.